Welcome to the Futurebuild podcast, where we connect the ideas, people, and solutions shaping a better built environment. Today's episode tackles one of the most stubborn and carbon intensive challenges in construction. What do we do with the vast volumes of material we dig out of the ground, and why so much of it is still treated as waste? I'm joined by William Rundle, founder of Nexus ReGen, a business that's redefining how the industry thinks about surplus materials, value, and collaboration. William's journey into the built environment didn't start behind the desk. He worked on demolition sites and bulk earthworks. He's worked his way from the tools to the boardroom, seeing firsthand how deeply embedded waste thinking is across construction. In this conversation, we'll explore why excess material is still automatically labelled as waste, how silos and outdated commercial models hold the industry back, and how data, when shaped properly, can unlock both significant cost savings and major carbon reductions. We'll also look at how Nexus ReGen has grown from a simple exchange tool into a national platform, why collaboration is becoming a competitive advantage, and what it will take the industry to finally get off the fence and embrace circularity at scale. If you're involved in infrastructure, development, contracting, or materials, this is the episode for you.
Well, pleasure having you on the podcast today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Right. We always start off by actually putting the focus on you a little bit and actually what got you into the built environment.
Well, yeah, that was I suppose influenced by family and family business. My parents had a business in broadly in construction, and my sort of always had an interest from there. And then going through school, I suppose most of my attention was on, I was quite enterprising from a young age. I sort of realised that academia wasn't necessarily my career path, and didn't be the path for me getting to university, etc. So I sort of, I wouldn't say fell into construction. It was more of a pathway that I took. And I went from an early age into working in asbestos demolition, bulk earthworks, so sort of straight into the big leagues of subcontracting, which was great, which I absolutely loved, and it sort of set me up my knowledge of sort of where I sit today.
We're going to come on to it in a bit. You know, you've got a really exciting startup that's, really changing the way that we do things. But I almost want to sort of take it back a step. And you mentioned there around demolition and bulk earthworks. When was it that you sort of noticed the opportunity? What was it, the sort of practices maybe as a built environment that we were doing that needed to change?
So I suppose it must have been subliminally absorbed by myself through years of working in excess materials, so going into projects and looking what happens to materials at the end of projects, some of which in demolition obviously are credits and looked at as value. But then in other bulk earthworks projects, they're a problem. It's a waste.
Yeah.
Which I definitely think we should touch on in this conversation. And then buying materials into projects where somewhere else even in the internal business that there's probably a material that could be suitable for that need. So I think it was over a number of years of observing it, and then I think it just became so clear to me that there was certainly a gap in the market to actually try and bring these different components together in perhaps a more modern viewpoint and more akin to how we deal with things in the digital world these days.
Yeah, there's less touch on that actually. It's been in the news recently. There's a huge amount of regulation coming around as well. That construction is a huge contributor to landfill, to waste. We are an industry that uses a huge amount of resource as well. Tell us maybe, give us a little bit of an insight into that, especially, in your specific sort of career of expertise, which is around that sort of, bulk material, heavy materials. How big is the problem out there?
The scale of the problem, I don't think is truly understood. There are lots of government statistics, but I don't think it truly represents the market, especially when we're coming to deal with what's end of life, what's recovered, what's reused, what's sent to landfill. So that is part of what we're actually doing. We're trying to address that. We're trying to understand actually what is the scale of the problem, have some proper figures that we can actually make some informed decisions around. But the scale of the problem, millions of tons that's known to the market, and that some of it is unavoidable, of course, but some of it is completely avoidable, and it's avoidable by planning, using the correct tools that are available to you, different procedures. So the scale of the problem is, in terms of volume, millions of tons. In scale of the problem of financial, that's millions, hundreds of millions of pounds off a market that exists out there. And I guess that market is a waste market, a resource market, a recovery market that exists really because of a lack of knowledge, a lack of management, a lack of tools that are available to the market. Is not completely cohesive, and not everyone's on one level playing field.
And tell us a little bit about the materials that we're talking about, that you deal with in particular.
So right now, we typically deal with soils and aggregates very broadly.
Yeah.
Obviously, the technical minds that are potentially listening to this and watching this, there's obviously huge amounts of nuances within those materials, but so broadly it's heavy materials, soils and aggregate. Our tech does deal with concrete and asphalt, but our predominant market is soils and aggregate.
And I was reading recently that actually, we're in short supply of aggregates, especially as a primary material. So it seems to me crazy that there is aggregate going to waste.
Yeah, that's it's pretty wild that that's the case, isn't it? And again, I think some of these points, and I can certainly focus on hyper nuanced cases and examples where we've had contractors that have installed haul roads for temporary access to a fixed viaduct on 5-kilometer stretches. They've imported the primary aggregate, and then that becomes surplus at the end of the project. What do we do? That's not unique, but that happens in the market. But yeah, it seems out that this is at a government level, with planning for quarries and the availability of materials. That's incredibly slow and incredibly regulated. But then where it comes down to a really granular level, what we see is, again, it's that visibility of someone has a material that someone else needs. And it's those two parties not being able to see each other. And that's why there's a huge amount of win.
Yeah. And I suppose this is, let's take a step back about, you're obviously at a contractor, you're dealing with this, across different projects. I imagine at that point you're doing what all contractors do, which is, sort of building in costs around waste as well. When was that light bulb moment of thinking there's a better way of doing this?
Yeah, I suppose there's a couple of points in there. I think building in cost for waste from the outset, it's that mindset that you're instilling in the project almost to a degree, that you've got that mental buffer that that there's a pot of money for that material going out the gate. I think most people, if you ask them, would like to reduce the amount of waste. But then if you're pushed on the project timescales, you're as an individual and as a project, your time is super poor. You don't have huge amount of availability to be able to look at best deals. You know that you've got a pot of money sat there that's been assigned to just getting rid of the problem. So that's the mindset piece and the fact it's baked in. And then for me, and perhaps for the light bulb moment, was that seems crazy that we need to start spinning there and say, yeah, fine, let's have a backstop, let's have a buffer that that if the worst case scenario that you have to get rid of it is a waste, fine, it's good to know that's good business. But let's do everything we can to not have to treat that material as a problem. Let's look at the asset from the outset and then change that mentality and change the way that the project actually looks at those materials.
So let's go straight into your company. You're a startup. Tell us about Nexus ReGen. What's your mission? What does it do? And I think we've sort of covered the sort of the issues it's trying to solve. It'd be great to sort of, give an idea of the scale of that and you know, what's, what's the issue you're trying to address.
So ultimately, the issue we're trying to address is we're trying to digitalize a very analog process, which enables the industry to optimize materials, and that can be excess materials or materials import export. And that's using things like data. So we're gathering data and gathering intelligence to make informed decision, and we're breaking down silos and trying to ensure that the industry is collaborative in the approach. And we are doing that through a digital platform, which seems to be the best method of achieving this.
Let's talk about those silos. I think I talk about it on every single podcast that I do. People talk about the sort of silos of the contractors, the clients, consultants, all operating separately. How does that work, or why does that matter so much in the sort of excess material world?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk for hours about this individual topics. It's quite emotive to some people, and I think a lot of people look at knowledge as power, which is absolutely right. But that's also what limits people coming out and starting to want to share. On a really granular level, you've got people who win projects based on their contacts, based on their knowledge of where there's options for materials. And they keep that really close to their chest. They won't share that because that's their knowledge, and rightly so. They've acquired it. They might have spent years building relationships. Might have, cost them significant amounts of money. So that automatically what makes those businesses want to protect that knowledge. And that happens obviously time and time again. That you see these black books moving with people through companies, and that becomes a real value. The problem we have there is that means that knowledge remains within businesses, and that knowledge can be academic knowledge, but it could also be knowledge of materials, knowledge of projects, knowledge of I have an excess or I have a need, and it is as literally as fundamental as that. And that just stays within businesses. And from contracting, from my days in that world, you see it so regularly that we used to do it. If we had demolition material coming out, or even in fact, if we had a void on a project, that was like gold dust to us, and we would protect that. And if we were bidding for a job and we knew that was there, that was unbelievable. It was amazing. It enabled us to then look for materials around us. And what we really need to do for the industry to be cohesive and to level up as unified, and without sounding too cliche, everyone needs to start sharing, and we are very much seeing the start of that.
So let's take a step back. How did the industry, before Nexus ReGen, how does the industry deal with excess materials, or currently, I suppose, until you really start to scale? What are some of the ways that people are doing this? I imagine a lot of this is going to landfill.
Yeah, there's landfill recovery, restoration, which in the right circumstance, it's absolutely right.
Yeah,
but not in every case, and probably more often than not, something better can be done. So, I suppose to answer your question directly, what do people do? I mean, commonly as a contractor, there will be a budget that we discussed earlier, and the natural move would be ask your ground worker, or if it within their package, or if not, ask them to have a look at it, get a price, go out and get as many prices as you can, and then quite often what's the best price, and that's going to run it. I'm tiring everyone with the same price. We appreciate some organizations have sustainability targets and different internal metrics, but that is the common practice, and that could be going to landfill, and it could just be the best price and end of life. And the contractor sort of reasonably probably doesn't worry too much about it at that point. But there are, as I mentioned a moment ago, not tying everyone the same brush. There are some contractors and some organizations that are hyper aware of the decisions that they're making. So, and I think that was a really big point for us.
And so I suppose this is where Nexus ReGen is quite unique, because you're connecting excess with need. And I suppose for people that are listening that have no idea about the sort of groundworks contracting world, there could be a case of people are digging out reasonably good topsoil that could be used then on a project that needs topsoil, or they're digging out, tell us a little bit about some of the case studies of how you've connected that excess with need.
Yeah, this is like the birthplace of the actual like why we exist, and so probably use some real case studies that actually happened. Sites, I won't name the contractors, but national residential developer, new site, greenfield development. We went in and tested soil as a contractor. This is pre-Nexus, and the soil was naturally achieving the BS3882 standard, so it was good quality material. We made sure that it had the right compliance, so it went through Claire, got an MMP in place, etc. And that then moved. It gave us the tools to move that to another project as a direct transfer, and that went in for landscaping. So it was a surplus on one side, and then it went to another site to be used for landscaping, which is a great win. It was super local, so a haulage mile, wagons on the road. The sustainability, though, so on that one specific case, there's 95% carbon reduction compared to if it was going to landfill. So that was an independent case study. And then there's a significant cost saving, which we like to always talk about sustainability being the driver of decisions. Ultimately, it is typically commercial with sustainability weighted. But this is a double win. You've got huge commercial gain and you've got huge sustainability saving. That example has happened numerous times. We've even had one project during our validation piece where it took the difference of moving a hair of spent between two developers from material to move. We have one site had a surplus, had all the correct permits in place, had all the correct testing, everything was there. And the site next door was importing material via road, but they would never talk. Contractor A would walk around to contractor B site and say, "Can we have your material? Do you need?" And we ended up brokering, again, back in the contracting world, that deal between the two projects, and it was a case of literally moving Harris fence and running it across on ADTs. Is really literally how it can happen, and that's again why we exist now for those exact reasons.
It's interesting you talk there about the sort of carbon saving, being, a big priority, but sometimes actually people are more concerned with, the cost savings,
Yeah.
and that seems to be a benefit. Do you find, let's go back to those silos. Do you find that differs depending on who you're talking to in that decision-making, Shay?
100%. It changes massively in the type of contracts you're talking to. Again, from consultancies, main contractors, supply chain. So very much depends when you're looking at those levels. But also the types of companies within them, and then the type of individuals you talk to. So their value proposition to a sustainability lead and someone that's purely focused on sustainability within the business will obviously want to look at the sustainability. But if you're then conversely talking to the commercial leads, they're going to be more weighted towards the commercials. So yeah, the I wouldn't say the power dynamic, but the optics on the value is so different within different organizations and different people within different organizations, which is, I suppose, that in some way.
And so your exchange, your tool enables you to measure both of those.
Yeah, so we're tracking, we can track a lot of different information. It's kind of down to our users as to how much they want to share with us. So in terms of tracking and understanding how much, what material is moving where and how it's moving will enable us to understand the carbon and the sustainability piece on that. But that's down to the organization wanting to share that level of information. Same with the commercial part as well.
Before we go into sort of, maybe some more of the nuances and the sort of the future of Nexus ReGen as well, I'm always fascinated on the journey of a founder and the journey of a startup, and maybe, some of the sort of lessons you've learned along the way. Go back to when you sort of founded. What were some of those sort of big challenges? Because you're trying to as we've already said, a really sort of silo traditional industry with something quite radical, even though it makes absolute sense.
Yeah.
I'd love to sort of, get some of your sort of early reflections.
Yeah. It's been a really interesting journey. It's exactly as you say, we're trying to change something. So you've got a lot of people on the sidelines saying, cheering us on, saying this is great. But then when it comes to asking them to move and do something, it's a little bit, oh God, this is a bit new. This is a bit different. How is this going to work? Who's going to move first? So in terms of our challenges as a business, that's been the real big thing, that we've had a lot of cheerleaders, but then really trying to convert those guys from saying, really like what you're doing, but we're going to adopt it ourselves. That's been the big challenge. So we've really spent 2.5 years changing that mentality from not just saying this is a good idea, it's saying it's a good idea and we're going to adopt it, which is very much where we're at now. But yes, we've had a lot of success. There's a lot of challenges. Having day one, at the back end of 2023, we spent most of 23 validating our concepts, and we spent a lot of time generating, engaging with the market, researching, asking if it's something that people want to see. First and foremost, understanding that there has been attempts at doing this prior to us and their failures and why did they fail. Back end of 23, again, that's the point, we went to an external contractor to build our first version, our MVP, of our platform. Launched it to a fairly safe group of people that we had good relationship with, and the feedback was, you've overcomplicated something I know. So we spent all this money, all this time, all this effort, all this resource to build something that wasn't really actually what the market wanted, which I think there's a massive lesson for us in that. And we had massive scope creep and we were getting excited with what we were building. It was all becoming, we could see where we wanted it to go and we were trying to go 4 steps instead of that first little step. Day one. So that was an expensive mistake. We rebuilt from the ground up from that moment. The contractor did a great job. Yeah, if they're listening, they did a fantastic job. They built exactly what we wanted, but what we had asked them to build probably wasn't quite right. So that was our first quite expensive mistake, but a massive learning, a massive life lesson in our business. And then, there's been incremental things that you can look back on now and think, I wish I'd known that, or I wish I'd done that slightly differently. But we can all sit here with hindsight and say, wish we had done that differently.
So what have been some of your key milestones? I imagine getting that first exchange is a big moment.
Yeah.
And sort of, what's been some of those other big milestones that you've sort of reflected on?
Yeah, I guess interestingly, there's lots of different measurable milestones. As a tech company, you've got tech milestone, and then we've got business milestone, and then general milestone. So things like, in no particular order, that first exchange, that happened organically. That was massive. That was such a big deal for us because it actually takes quite a lot of, it has to be the right timing. You have to have 2 contractors that need the same, or have and want the same thing at the same time. You also need options. You can't just rely on one person. You have to have multiple people that are aligning in that position. So that was a big deal. Paid customers, our first proper paying customer, was obviously quite a big deal for us, for multiple reasons, the obvious as well, the financial. And then some of our huge milestones have been things like some of our framework agreements, like working with National Highway. We've today had the PRs gone out that Persimmon Homes have mandated us across all their business units nationally, which is huge for us, and that's off the back of some fairly rigorous, trial and understanding of the business on how we fit with them. It's not a case of unpacking it and off you go. This is deep domain integration. This is really embedded in these businesses. So it's not a small decision for these guys to be taken. So a significant milestone. And there's lots of other things. We're working with Lancaster University. We've got a PhD project for 3.5 years where we're the industry partner, and which enables us to collaborate with some of our partners. So again, use Persimmon as the example in this. So there's been some massive validation pieces. There's been some massive business wins, and growing our team. We've got a fantastic team that it's a fairly niche specialism to understand materials, but also understand how the tech works in materials. And it's we're assembling a very niche specialist crew.
Well, let's go back into that. Let's go into some of the tech as well, because I know, everyone seems to have AI integrated now, but you've got quite a neat sort of system behind it, haven't you? You've got some really unique features and functionality behind it all as well.
Yeah, but we have the, you're absolutely right. AI is a buzzword. Let's almost address that from the outside. We've only stopped saying AI because it's almost become a bit of a overused word. So we have sort of stepped back from it. But for us as a business, we made the decision when we went from rebuilding that MVP at the start of 2024. Our new CTO was very aware of the movement of AI and what that can do for especially platform and SaaS companies. So we made the decision, and quite a radical decision at that stage, is even how quickly AI is moving. Back at the start of 2024, it was still fairly conceptual. ChatGPT was a thing, and people starting to understand how it could be used, but becoming an AI first company at a startup stage was quite a big decision. So we made that decision, which was the biggest bearing that had was how we built our database and how we extract information, how we stored it, how we organized it in order to be able to therefore that quickly and then different modules and different agents and what have you that we can use for our clients. So waffling to the point, some of the big tools this has enabled us to deal with things like matching. So it's what we call smart matching. And that's mapping or using our technology to say your site over here, you need a BS300 topsoil, and then we can automatically give you options of who's nearby. Might seem like a really small thing, but actually when we're in a sort of a time where people want instant gratification and people want like instant results, that gives instant results. And that's also been one of the big problems of material transfer and why our perhaps predecessors failed, is because you are solely relying on multiple different deals, where there are smart matching uses our knowledge of projects, knowledge of different needs and wants, and then we can automatically match them. Lots of different very capable features.
So we probably be people listen to this going, never heard of Nexus ReGen, but this sounds pretty good. How do people get involved? And I suppose you touched on there's a commercial model behind it as well. How does that work as well? Sort of, if I'm a contractor, I've got sites, I've got excess material. What's the process?
So to start the process involved, we have a brilliant customer support team and sales function. So we'll speak to you, would want to understand your business so we can scope and make sure that you have the right package for you and you put the right tools within that package. Then it's a fairly straightforward onboarding process, and we'll create you moving to the model that we run. So we run a subscription-based model. Okay. That seems to have hit the sweet spot for our customers. When we first launched, we were on a percentage commission tie model. A lot of nuance in that, and it just became very clear that clients wanted cost certainty. They wanted to know what price they were paying and what they were getting, which led us to the commercial subscription model. And that's what seems to have sat well with our contractors. They've got their cost base, and then we give them our job then is to make sure that they get a return on their investment, which we do through different means.
And what's your sort of sweet spot of client? I know you mentioned Persimmon, huge, and national highways, but this is applicable for all sizes?
Yeah, largely it's applicable for all sizes. So we work with lots of different regional organisations. So down in Cornwall, for example, we've got a fantastic, relatively new business called Recycle It Global RIG. They're regional to Cornwall and Devon at the moment. So that's regional. We then deal with nationals, as you mentioned, Persimmon, National Highways, Volker, etc., etc. So there's no real size fit. That's where the scoping for your subscription comes in. We need to understand you as a business in order to build the right package. There's no point in giving you a subscription fit for Persimmon, but you're a 500 unit developer regionally. We need to make sure it fits. So yeah, we do scale it to.
And you link in as well, you're obviously linking the person that's got the excess material with the need. What about the haulage and the sort of the specialist services that go around all of that as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. So with sort of primary sort of enterprise users, so the Persimmons and the contracts, what have you, we also have hauliers. So have haulage only organizations. We have organizations that offer that haulage and loading, etc. So we understand that if Persimmon and Volker were doing a deal, neither of them have wagons, so they need to introduce a third-party haulier into the process, which we can facilitate. And one of our upcoming roadmap pushes is to offer that as an automated part in the process. But that also extends out to things like testing. So we work with organizations like Stockatech and RSK for that support. So we don't offer that as a company, but we can. Part of our ecosystem is those companies that can offer that support for testing and making sure our clients are informed and compliant throughout the whole process.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that roadmap. I'm intrigued. Sort of, I think with all startups, they always talk about scale, and how do you scale up? But it would be great to sort of give a picture of sort of where you're now, but where do you want to be in 12 months, 5 years? What is the size of this opportunity?
So the opportunities is vast. It's massive in terms of impact and scale and reach. In terms of us as a tech company, we've been developing at a good pace, and our cadence has been fairly pacey for a startup, and obviously with fairly limited resource and team size and capability, etc. So we will be scaling our team in order to ramp up that development. What the next 12 months looks like is we are now building. So we've just launched our version 4, which is game changing for us as a business. It's a massive AI step for us. And that is using the last 2 years of knowledge that we've gathered in order to build our next version. So we're going to be releasing lots of incredible tools that will enable the market to be really reactive rather than proactive with engagement. And that's going to be the big step change for us. And also we're addressing one of the big problems that we see in the market is knowledge gap. And that has historically been part of the issue why people steer away from trying to reuse materials, because it's really nuanced. If you get it wrong, it's expensive, but worse yet, it is actually it's environmental crime. There's all sorts of regulatory issues that go with it. So to get it wrong, it's bad. So we're now helping organizations with addressing that through some of our tools. So we're not trying to educate people. That was what we first started out. We're trying to do is help people understand how to do things. We don't think that everyone's got the time and the aptitudes to want to learn. And I think that's if we've got to reason with that. I mean, I always use the analogy that we can learn long division and we can work out our numbers, or we can reach for a calculator and you don't really have to think about it. You type it in, and that's kind of what we're building, these tools that if you know what you want to achieve, then we'll get there for you. So that's going back to your original question. That's what 2026 looks like for us. The next 6 to 12 months is going to be a huge amount of those type of tools that can enable our customers and compliant and lots of different facets in that world.
It feels like the stars are aligning for you as well. I know there's a lot of regulation coming out. I think, fly tipping is massively in the spotlight. We've seen those huge, those terrible images of, it's not all construction waste, but of fields and fields just with dumped waste. It's very much in the public mindset, isn't it, at the moment? And I think we are, not just as an industry, but as the UK population, taking waste and resource very seriously. So it feels like, you're on the right track.
Yeah, I would certainly say waste crime there's no positive to come from it. But from us as a business, that this is actually is shining the spotlight on an issue that exists, and it's become hyper apparent for everyone now. You can't hide from the fact it happens, but everyone knows it happened up before now. It's just kind of being swept under the carpet, and that's where things like, yes, us as a business, there's legislation tailwind, there's public awareness now of a problem. We're talking about these like massive fly tipping examples. But there's all sorts of other waste crimes that happen in double ticketing, materials going to the wrong sites, being misclassified. The thing that can solve a lot of that is digital awareness. So if you've got a digital tool where you cannot move outside of the bounds of compliance, and if you are operating outside it becomes very, very clear. That's what's happening. That's where we're shifting. And that's where a lot of our resources moving into is helping clients remain compliant. That is one thing that's worth saying. We're not going to become a tracking company, and we work with a lot of fantastic tracking companies, and that's not where we're moving. But we'll be taking that information and presenting it to clients to make informed decisions and to know their projects are compliant.
So on top of compliance, there's obviously many companies, and one of your big partnerships you mentioned already was National Highways. Their carbon budget as well, and carbon target. So this is helping with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The carbon target has been, and I'm on the right podcast to be talking about this, but it's often been a target that has been missed, and everyone kind of sets this target. Wouldn't it be nice to do? But there's no real, you're not penalised if you don't achieve it. I don't want to go as far, and especially not in the context of National Highways, but it's a greenwashing case. But there's real measurability and there's real weight against achieving these targets now. So yeah, National Highways is a great example. This has been driven from them from a sustainability perspective, wanting to ensure that if materials are going to landfill at end of life, that they've been all the options that could have happened that should have been exhausted. So they're not saying it can never happen, but they're saying, what can we do to make sure that we've done everything we can for that not to happen? And the same with materials coming in. Do we always need to be importing primary, or are there other options? Are there new technology that are coming through? And we're working with some fantastic innovators in the industry who are bringing that new technology into the market, who can satisfy that. And one example being an organisation that we work with EcoFill, who work their products will work with different materials on site, different clays and what have you, to retain them on the project and then be not stabilized but blended, that they can then be used in the scheme. So one example of a number of different innovators that we're working with.
People are finally waking up to the value in excess materials and not just seeing it as a cost they've got to build into a project.
Without. And I think, I suppose, looking at it conversely to value, you've got the cost. And I think the landfill tax reform conversation that happened at the end of 2025 was a real awakening moment for a lot of contractors who have costed on long-term projects and built their costs in on their exposure to landfill at that rate. That was going to be absolutely blown out the water had the lobbying not been successful, and the change, there is change coming, and the landfill tax rates are going up. So you've got that end of the scale, you've got costs growing to that, so more and more awareness is growing on that. But then you've got the other end of the scale of the opportunity, and people now understanding that actually this is an asset, this is fundamentally something that has a value. That value could be, it's going to cost me £350 a load to get rid of over here, or it's going to, I can get rid of it for, it could be worth someone paying.
So the haulage, is it going to shift? Is it actually going to shift to the point where they could sell it?
We've seen examples where materials have been sold. So there's lots of nuances. There's like geographic timing, the type of material, all sorts of different things. But yeah, absolutely. These materials are being looked at as assets now, opposed to, and there's so many examples. Like, what we used to look at clay and say that's such a problem. What are we going to do with clay? And you've got all these reservoirs being built that needs to be lined with clay. And I appreciate it's not quite as straightforward as saying, well, I've got 5,000 ton of clay down in Kent. What can I do with it? It has to go somewhere. But these are some of the examples that are starting to happen, and we're working with organisations who looking to optimise those assets here and look at them as real commodities.
I suppose as you scale, at heart you're a data business. You're going to get some amazing insight from that data as well. And I suppose you're already seeing some of them.
Yeah, this going back to like the original point, one of the original questions of this conversation is the data that we're collecting is unbelievable. It's already starting to surface huge amounts of information. And I guess it's what we enable the market to do with that data, and what we do with that is what becomes really exciting. And we, I'll talk about Persimmon in this example, is they're really throwing themselves into making informed decisions. In order to make those informed decisions, they need to collect that data. So we're working with them and their supply chain on their project to collect all the data, to then surface it, and then to enable them in the future to make different decisions. If they need to make different decisions, see what works well, what didn't work well. And that's where things start to become really exciting. And for us, what's really, really exciting is we're working on a pre-contract tender stage scheme. So we're seeing materials that are needed way before the market's seeing them. We're seeing what's excess. So we're actually seeing some of these on a fairly industrious scale, seeing data and information that has such value to the market in so many different ways. That's really exciting for us.
And you mentioned before that the excess, especially in heavy materials, is very nuanced. Is that a lane you're always going to stay in, or do you think you're going to go out to wider excess material?
That's a tricky question. We are technically set up to be able to handle any type of material. The lane that we're in at the moment is so significant. There's such a massive impact, not just in the UK, globally, but that we will continue to focus on this to make sure we get it absolutely right, and so the market out, to make sure that we're adding as much value to the market as possible. We want to be a huge value add and a reason to change. Once we've achieved that, who knows, we may start exploring other material streams and dip our toe in that.
I want to go back slightly to your experience as a startup, and I saw on your website that you were part of Cemex Ventures sort of top 50 startups. I'm always intrigued to sort of the support that you can get that's out there. I've had people on from Innovate. I've talked to a lot of startups about that journey. What's been your experience?
I'd say a fairly mixed experience. So really positive end, you've got Cemex. They haven't invested in us, just to be clear. But they were so supportive. They gave us great exposure. They were there to bounce ideas off.
Yeah.
They never asked for anything intrusive from us, because they weren't trying to mine information. I know that's what probably the cynics will suggest that they were up to, but I always think it's good to have friends in different areas. And Cemex were certainly an organization that gave us a platform. They invited us to lots of different events, keynote speaking events, where there were lots of our target customers. So that was really helpful. There's been some process that we've been through that have been a bit frustrating, where we probably tick 9 out of 10 boxes, but for some reason we weren't successful with that process, which is fine. That's life. We deal with it. But it did probably shape our futures, all of these processes. And I'm kind of going down the road of like funding and what have you, in infrastructure, and the decision as a startup, time and resource are so finite that these processes take a huge amount of time and effort. And we as a business made the decision not to continue to pursue them in order to grow the business and focus on the actual business. We were going through a couple of processes. At one point, we actually backed out a couple just for the amount of time that they were taking and distracting from the actual business. And right now, we're really glad we did. Who knows what would have happened had we knocked off? We may have been successful with funding and all the rest of it. So that's probably why I have a bit of a mixed bag. There's been some organizations that have helped us and not had anything in return, and there's been others that have perhaps been a bit more commercial.
What do you think how do you think the built environment could better support startups and innovation? We've talked a little bit about, I think they need to get off the fence and actually trial something new. But yeah, I'm just sort of intrigued about your journey and sort of where you needed support maybe and didn't get it.
Yeah, I think there's so many different areas, and I think it would be applicable to different businesses in different ways. I mean, I think for us, the big thing was just getting off the fence, that just make a decision. Don't waste your time or our time by like flirting with the idea for months and months and months if you really don't think you're going to do something. And there's been a couple of examples of that. Some real positives have been people have tried it and trialed it in, so I suppose, small pilot focal areas, and that's proved value. And Sim is a great example of that. Last year trialed it, that they've now seen value and signed up to an exclusive group-wide agreement. But where they could probably be more supportive is being more willing and open, and also not to tie people up in months and months of bureaucracy. That a week for us is a lot of time. It feels like ages. So if you go from a meeting in January and say, right, okay, we'll next touch base in March, that is just so much time for us. And we are literally working by the hour when things are changing. And also, don't think you know it all. I think would be one of my examples. You go into these conversations with people like, oh yeah, we know that things have changed. Things are changing quickly. Technology is changing quickly. That there's so much is happening. And you may have had a bad experience with something in the past, but perhaps be open and willing. We see that in different levels and different companies. But I'd say for organizations to perhaps understand there's a little bit of urgency in startups that commonly will run on a fairly tight budget, fairly lean team. So time isn't something that we can just be continuously going to meeting after meeting after meeting. But I suppose that is the difference in some of the guys that are still here today that have got startups. We're nearly 3 years into our journey. And it does take a lot of resource, but they are paying, it's paying dividends now as we're onboarding these guys that we've been chasing for 16 months. So I say pace is a big thing. If any station listening and they want to support startups, just recognize that people want to move quickly. Which I know is hard if you're in a big business, and it's hard to turn a tanker and trust and new organization.
It's hard, isn't it? 'Cause you as a startup, it means everything to you, and that's your one sole focus. Where in a large organization, it's a sort of, you're probably one of 500 different things that they're focusing on. That I know the feeling.
Yeah, exactly. And we're really excited you expressed yourself from that situation. You can see exactly why your next meeting is 3 months' time. And these are really busy people, especially, I guess, real decision makers in big companies. Their time is finite as well. And you are probably one of hundreds of different things that they're trying to deal with. But for you as a founder, it's everything, and it's all consumed, and you just sit there thinking, "Go on, please, sir." Yeah. So that is true.
Well, this podcast is all about companies, individuals making a positive impact on the built environment, and there's no doubt that Nexus ReGen has or is making a huge positive impact on the built environment. Not just those cost savings, those carbon savings as well, and just changing the way that we're doing things. I've got 2 questions that I'm going to finish it off, and I'll ask them both to you. The first one is, what's your vision of the future? What do you want to see from the built environment that real positive impact? And the second one is, who's some individuals that had a positive impact on you during your journey? This is your sort of opportunity, is your sort of Oscar moment to shout out like your mum and your dad and do that.
So, a couple of massive questions there. The future of the business and the future of industry, right, as a whole. I personally see the industry, we've got skills shortages, we've got employment level are at an all-time low in construction. So we've got some massive holes to fill, and technology can fill a lot of those holes and some knowledge gaps. So I see the industry leaning in massively to technology. We're so far behind the curve, 10 years plus, where the rest of the world and other markets have moved. Construction lags behind so far. So I see the industry catching up and leaning in. I think very much an arcade, that there's so much to be had from it. There's so much in terms of compliance, cost, operation, awareness, just huge amount. So in the next X amount of years, I wouldn't like to put a number on it, but I see digital tools becoming fundamental in organizations. Much like sat-nav has in the car, it will become that level of a level of integration. I don't know whether that's going to be groundbreaking as a response, but that comes with a huge amount of tangibles and intangibles attached to it. as an answer. And for my Oscar moment, who I want to thank, I would say there's been a few really, really influential people in my life. One of my previous employers, actually, I worked for about 6 years. Julian House. He was really influential. He wasn't your textbook business owner, and he wasn't corporate. He wasn't wooden. He had a great personality. I think when you're young and influential, getting into the business world, you think that business owner is very stereotypical, and this is kind of how they are. And I saw that he was doing business through his personality, and he was really likable and had built great relationships, were so powerful in business. And it wasn't just, of course, the products and of course your business offering solution has to marry up with that. But I think people do business with people, and I think he was a really good benchmark of what kind of a person I wanted to be in how I conduct myself in business. And then throughout my journey, I've even right now, we've got some fantastic people involved in our business, our non-execs, all slightly different and bring a different spin onto the business. But yeah, David Bate, Damien Layden, and Stephen Kirk, they all bring a lot to our business and have helped me. And there's a couple of people beyond that as well. There's a chap called Shane Graham, who's actually based out in Australia. He was looking at us potentially as an investment. We've muted that conversation for a moment, but he was so quick to offer his personal support for me as an individual, and he checks in so regularly and gives so much guidance. It's things like that is so influential and so important.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more of your comment there around people just want to do business with people that they like, and get on with. And I think that's so important, especially in our industry. Will, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast today. We'll finish off with, if people want to do business with you, it's find you on LinkedIn. We'll put your link in there, get on your website, contact your team.
Absolutely.
Brilliant.
Yeah, that'd be perfect. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for having me here today.
Cheers.